anything bad that was said. And I think I did for a lot of it. I think so. Maybe not, but I tried.
What untold truths lie behind the dazzling smile and legendary career of Ann-Margret? At 84, her story is marked not only by triumphs on stage and screen, but also by heartbreaks, hidden battles, and extraordinary resilience. Stay with us as we uncover the tragedies and the courage that shaped one of Hollywood's most unforgettable icons, the night the music stopped. The year was 1972, and Ann-Margret was at the height of her fame. Known for her fiery red hair, magnetic presence, and show-stopping energy, she had conquered both Hollywood and Las Vegas. Her performances were never ordinary. They were spectacles of light, sound, and daring entrances. That September, at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel in Nevada, she prepared to stun her audience once again with an elaborate opening. What was meant to dazzle, however, became a moment that nearly cost her everything. During rehearsal, Ann-Margret had planned a dramatic entrance from an elevated platform, but a last-minute change in the set structure created a deadly trap. On the night of the show, as she stepped into the spotlight, the platform gave way. She plummeted over 20 feet to the hard stage floor. The impact was catastrophic. Her jaw was shattered, her cheekbones crushed in multiple places, her arm broken, and her body limp. The audience gasped in horror as medics rushed to her side. Ann-Margret slipped into unconsciousness. For the next 3 days, she remained in a coma, hovering between life and death. Doctors worked urgently, facing the enormous challenge of reconstructing her face and repairing the extensive fractures. With her career depending on her image, Ann-Margret was faced with a painful choice once she regained consciousness. Surgeons offered a safer path that would heal faster but leave visible scars, or a more excruciating method that would preserve her appearance. She chose the latter, enduring months of agony during her recovery. Her mother, who flew from Sweden to be by her side, later described those days as the most harrowing of her life. The actress was fed intravenously for weeks, unable to chew or speak properly. Every step in her recovery demanded not only medical skill but extraordinary mental strength. The ordeal was not just physical, it was emotional and psychological. Ann-Margret, celebrated for her vitality, had to rebuild not only her face but her confidence. During this fragile period, many wondered if her career had come to an abrupt end. Hollywood can be unkind, and the entertainment industry often discards performers who cannot keep pace with its demands. But Ann-Margret's willpower was greater than the doubts surrounding her. After months of rehabilitation, she began practicing her movements again, slowly regaining her ability to perform. Each step forward was a victory, each rehearsal a symbol of defiance against the accident that tried to silence her. By 1973, she stunned both critics and fans by returning to the stage. Against all odds, she reclaimed her place in the spotlight. The comeback was not just professional, it was deeply symbolic. Her survival and determination became part of her legend. Industry insiders later noted that what could have ended her career instead redefined it. Ann-Margret had faced mortality and refused to surrender, earning newfound respect not just as an entertainer, but as a fighter. This accident remained a defining phase of her life. Even decades later, in interviews, Ann-Margret admitted that the fall changed her perception of fragility and resilience. It was a reminder that glamour, applause, and fame could vanish in a second. Yet it also taught her the value of perseverance and inner strength. Audiences who saw her after the accident noticed something new in her performances. The daring dancer and singer now carried a depth that had been born out of suffering. Every smile, every movement held a trace of the woman who had literally fought her way back to the stage. But what happened when another passion of hers, one far outside the stage lights, brought her face to face with danger yet again? Stay with us to uncover the hidden details. Fires, fuel, and a second fall. Ann-Margret's connection to motorcycles was never a passing fancy. It began in the 1960s, long before it became fashionable for women in Hollywood to embrace such rugged hobbies. While others saw motorcycles as a reckless indulgence, she saw freedom, independence, and a thrill that matched her own restless energy. The image of Ann-Margret in leather, straddling a Triumph bike, became as iconic as her roles on screen. This passion wasn't staged for publicity, it was deeply personal. By the late 1990s, she was still riding, still chasing the hum of engines and the open road. At an age when most stars had long retired from such pursuits, Ann-Margret refused to give up the machine that had been part of her identity for decades. But that devotion nearly destroyed her a second time. In August 2000, she traveled to Minnesota to attend a racing event at Brainerd International Raceway. The gathering wasn't about glamour, it was about community among fellow enthusiasts. Here, the actress, known worldwide for her elegance, was simply another rider sharing stories and rides. But as she took her motorcycle out for what should have been a routine ride, fate intervened. Something went wrong. Ann-Margret was thrown from her bike, hitting the ground hard. The impact fractured 3 of her ribs and shattered her left shoulder. Witnesses described the crash as violent, a reminder of just how unforgiving motorcycles can be. The injuries were serious enough to hospitalize her, and doctors warned her that recovery would take time. Yet, even while wearing a sling and struggling with pain, she shocked everyone with her reaction. Most would have abandoned riding after such a scare, but Ann-Margret did not. Remarkably, the very next day she returned to the raceway. Still injured, still bruised, she appeared before the crowd, not on her motorcycle this time, but in the pace car that led the other riders. Her presence was more than symbolic. It was a declaration that she would not let fear define her. Fans and fellow riders were in awe, many calling it one of the bravest gestures they had ever witnessed at the track. Her relationship with motorcycles has always been marked by this balance of thrill and risk. She once admitted that riding gave her a sense of release from the pressures of Hollywood, offering a kind of anonymity on the road. But with that liberation came danger, and the 2000 crash was not the first close call she had faced. Decades earlier, she had also suffered minor accidents that left her shaken but never dissuaded. The resilience she displayed in returning to the raceway the day after her crash became a story carried across entertainment and sports pages alike. Commentators noted how unusual it was for someone in her position to embrace such visible vulnerability. Yet, rather than hiding away in recovery, Ann-Margret chose to confront the danger head-on, reinforcing her reputation as a woman unwilling to be confined by expectations. What makes this episode even more striking is the timing. At the turn of the millennium, Ann-Margret was already a seasoned performer, having spent nearly 4 decades in the public eye. Many in her generation had slowed down, content with reflecting on their legacies. She, instead, was still testing her limits, still seeking the rush of living fully. For her fans, the Minnesota crash was a chilling echo of the accident nearly 3 decades earlier in Lake Tahoe. But to Ann-Margret, it was not about repeating history, it was about facing it. She refused to let the shadow of her past define her relationship with the things she loved. Riding motorcycles was part of her essence, and even a devastating fall could not rewrite that truth. Her courage on that racetrack left observers with a powerful impression. Ann-Margret was more than an entertainer. She was a fighter, someone whose spirit could not be dimmed by fear or broken bones. Yet, as powerful as these physical trials were, the most painful battles she faced in life came not from the stage or the open road, but from within her own home. Come with us to find out more. The quiet battle no spotlight could solve. By the late 1970s, Ann-Margret had achieved nearly everything an entertainer could dream of. She was acclaimed in Hollywood, beloved in Las Vegas, and respected across America as one of the most dynamic performers of her generation. But away from the stage lights, a very different story was unfolding, one that no scriptwriter could glamorize. Ann-Margret longed for a family of her own. She and her husband, actor Roger Smith, shared hopes of welcoming children into their lives. They tried repeatedly, yet the dream remained out of reach. The heartbreak of infertility is one that millions silently endure, and Ann-Margret was no exception. Each attempt brought fresh disappointment, eroding the confidence of a woman so often seen as invincible in public. The inability to have children was not simply a medical fact, it was a wound that deepened with time. Friends would later recall how she would withdraw after discussions about family. The subject carried a quiet weight, one she rarely addressed openly, preferring instead to bury the sorrow behind her characteristic smile. But no mask, no matter how practiced, can shield against inner anguish forever. In those years, she turned increasingly to alcohol. What began as a way to numb pain slowly became a dangerous escape. The actress who had once commanded stages with vitality now found herself slipping into a haze that dulled both her suffering and her joy. By her own later admissions, this period was among the darkest of her life. Alcohol, however, did not erase the burden. It only compounded it. Her friends and close colleagues began to notice subtle changes: exhaustion, mood swings, and a clouded presence in conversations. Some expressed concern, but Ann-Margret, fiercely private and protective of her public image, often brushed these warnings aside. To the world, she was still glamorous, but behind closed doors, she was unraveling. The turning point came in 1980. After years of trying to navigate her grief and her reliance on alcohol, she reached a moment of reckoning. The lifestyle was unsustainable, and she knew it. With the support of her husband and medical professionals, she entered therapy. The process was neither quick nor easy, but it marked the beginning of her commitment to sobriety. Therapy forced her to confront emotions she had long buried. Infertility, the losses that came with it, and the loneliness it created were laid bare. She faced the truth without pretense, a courage that paralleled her resilience on the stage but demanded an entirely different strength. Unlike the roar of a crowd, this strength came in silence, in the painful introspection of private healing. Choosing sobriety in 1980 changed the course of her life. Slowly, Ann-Margret rebuilt herself, learning to navigate a life where certain dreams would never come true. She poured her energy into her work, but this time with a deeper understanding of herself. That transformation reshaped her career, leading to performances that carried an emotional gravity not seen before. Her later roles, such as her Oscar-nominated performance in Tommy, reflected a maturity rooted not only in skill but in lived pain. Viewers sensed something raw, something that came from beyond rehearsals or technique. It was the authenticity of a woman who had endured heartbreak and fought to rise above it. This period also strengthened her bond with Roger Smith. Together, they embraced a different kind of family life, one that did not include biological children but was no less rich in love and loyalty. She became a stepmother to his 3 children from a previous marriage, finding fulfillment in guiding and supporting them. In this way, she redefined what motherhood could mean for her. The quiet battles Ann-Margret fought in the shadows never made headlines in the same way her accidents did, but they shaped her even more profoundly. Pain taught her resilience. Sobriety gave her clarity, and loss, though devastating, allowed her to connect with others through empathy and authenticity. But while inner battles can scar the soul, another test of endurance awaited her, one that would stretch across decades and demand devotion that few could sustain. Stay with us to know what really happened. Love as a long duty. When Ann-Margret married actor Roger Smith in 1967, many doubted the union would last. He was a rising star with roles in films and television, particularly remembered for the series 77 Sunset Strip. She was already a Hollywood sensation, known for her bold charisma and headlining power. The contrast between them seemed sharp, and critics predicted the marriage would collapse under the weight of fame. Instead, what unfolded was a story of extraordinary loyalty, one that would span half a century. Not long after their marriage, Roger Smith's health began to falter. By the early 1970s, he was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, a rare neuromuscular disease that weakens the body's voluntary muscles. At a time when most actors were chasing career heights, Smith was forced to step away from the spotlight. His condition required constant management, from medications to lifestyle adjustments, and placed strain on the young marriage. Yet Ann-Margret did not retreat from the challenge. Instead of continuing her own life unaltered, she became both partner and caretaker. Medical studies note that caregiving for chronic neuromuscular conditions can lead to exhaustion, anxiety, and depression in spouses, but Ann-Margret accepted the burden without complaint. She traveled less, adjusted her work commitments, and made home life revolve around Roger's needs. Friends recalled how fiercely protective she became of him, often ensuring that outsiders did not see the full extent of his struggles. Through the 1980s and 1990s, when her own career was undergoing shifts, Roger Smith transitioned into her manager, handling business affairs behind the scenes. While his health fluctuated, he found purpose in supporting her career from another angle. Together, they created a partnership not built on the glamour of Hollywood parties, but on the steady rhythm of shared responsibility. It is worth noting that this devotion defied Hollywood's usual patterns. In an industry where marriages often collapsed under pressure, theirs grew stronger. Ann-Margret once described her love for Roger as her anchor, a phrase that captured how central he was to her existence. The couple was rarely apart, traveling together for work, attending functions as a unit, and leaning on one another in public and private. Roger's illness was not their only trial. He also battled other health complications, including Parkinsonism later in life. For many, decades of caregiving might have led to resentment, but Ann-Margret stood firm. She often credited her upbringing in Sweden, where commitment and loyalty were deeply instilled, for shaping how she approached marriage. To her, the vows she spoke in 1967 were non-negotiable. By the 2000s, their relationship had become a quiet emblem of endurance. While tabloids reported on Hollywood's divorces and scandals, Ann-Margret and Roger's bond represented the opposite, a reminder that true devotion could withstand decline, illness, and the fading of external glamour. In interviews, she rarely spoke at length about the daily challenges, choosing instead to honor his dignity. But those close to them saw the truth. The marriage was a lesson in patience, sacrifice, and extraordinary love. In 2017, Roger Smith passed away at the age of 84. Ann-Margret, now in her mid-70s, was left to grieve the man who had defined half a century of her life. His death marked not only the end of their marriage, but also the conclusion of her longest role, that of caregiver and constant companion. At memorials, she appeared dignified yet deeply shaken, showing the world how profoundly she had loved him. But as steadfast as this marriage was, there was another period of her life when devotion meant stepping into a war zone, facing danger not for one man but for thousands. Come with us to see what lies ahead. Applause in a war zone. In the mid-1960s, when the Vietnam War was tearing across headlines and American families were divided by fear and protest, Ann-Margret made a choice that few entertainers would dare. She agreed to travel overseas to perform for U.S. troops stationed in the thick of the conflict. It wasn't about money, publicity, or a carefully managed appearance. It was about showing up for young men who were far from home, hungry for a reminder of normal life. Her first USO tour in 1966 took her into conditions that few in Hollywood could have imagined. The climate was sweltering, the bases rough and makeshift, and the emotional atmosphere charged with both adrenaline and exhaustion. Soldiers lined up eagerly, waiting to see the woman who had captured American screens with Bye Bye Birdie and Viva Las Vegas. For a brief moment, the war receded, replaced by music, laughter, and the sight of a familiar star who risked her own safety to be there. Ann-Margret's performances were not extravagant showcases with elaborate costumes or stage sets. She adapted to the environment, often performing with minimal equipment, surrounded by troops sitting on the ground or standing shoulder to shoulder in improvised venues. She knew the purpose wasn't perfection, but connection. A smile, a song, and a gesture of gratitude were as powerful as any polished act. In 1968, she returned for a second tour, a decision that underscored her commitment. This was the same year when violence in Vietnam escalated after the Tet Offensive, and the dangers of travel were magnified. During one flight into Phu Bai, her helicopter came under ground fire. Soldiers later recalled how they instinctively shielded her with their bodies, determined to protect the woman who had come so far to boost their spirits. The risk was very real, but Ann-Margret never let fear dictate her actions. What set her apart from many celebrities who performed for troops was the personal attention she gave. After shows, she would linger, signing autographs, shaking hands, and listening to stories. Soldiers who met her decades ago have often retold the memory as one of the highlights of their service. Her presence wasn't fleeting, it was human, grounded in genuine compassion. Ann-Margret's Vietnam tours also left their mark on her personally. In later years, she admitted that the soldiers' faces, their longing for home, and the harsh realities of their situation stayed with her. She described feeling invincible when surrounded by the men, not because she was fearless, but because their faith and resilience inspired her. To them, she wasn't just an actress, she was a reminder of the world waiting on the other side of war. The courage to perform in a war zone revealed another layer of her character. She was not just a glamorous star, she was willing to put herself in uncomfortable, even life-threatening circumstances for the sake of others. In an era when public opinion of the war was deeply divided, she never sought to make political statements. Her mission was singular: to uplift morale, to remind troops that they were not forgotten. Her service through entertainment was later recognized as one of the most heartfelt contributions of her career. Veterans often credit her with providing moments of light in one of the darkest chapters of their lives. This act of bravery and generosity became part of her legacy, one that stood alongside her film and music accomplishments. Vietnam tested her courage in battle, but later years tested her creativity. Refusing to dwell on past glories, she reinvented herself, showing that age could never silence her spirit. Stay tuned to discover more. Reinvention at 81. In April 2023, Ann-Margret surprised the music world with a move few expected. At an age when most performers retreat from the public eye, she returned with a new studio album titled Born to be Wild. It wasn't just another nostalgic collection, it was a bold declaration that her creative fire still burned brightly. The choice of title alone signaled defiance. It echoed not just a song, but a spirit, one tied to the image she had cultivated decades earlier when she first straddled motorcycles in films and photo shoots. Her comeback was not quiet. The album included collaborations with well-known musicians spanning genres and generations. Joe Perry, the hard-driving guitarist from Aerosmith, lent his sound. Pete Townshend of The Who, a figure synonymous with rock rebellion, appeared as well. The Oak Ridge Boys, famed for their harmonies, and Pat Boone, known for his smooth, classic style, added further depth. Each guest represented a different era of popular music, but together they created a record that bridged past and present in unexpected ways. The numbers confirmed the impact. Born to be Wild reached number 93 on Billboard's top album sales, marking her first charting album since 1964. Nearly 60 years had passed since her music had last been measured in the industry's competitive ranks, and yet here she was, re-entering a field dominated by far younger artists. For historians of popular music, this accomplishment was not merely a statistic, it was a reminder that longevity and relevance can exist side by side. Visually, the rollout tapped into her iconic biker persona. Ann-Margret had long been associated with motorcycles, famously riding Triumph bikes in the 1960s both on and off screen. For the new album's imagery, she embraced this identity once again, appearing alongside gleaming machines that evoked speed, rebellion, and timeless cool. Instead of leaning into the softness often expected of older performers, she returned to the toughness that had once made her stand apart. This reinvention carried meaning beyond aesthetics. Studies in cultural sociology often highlight how older entertainers are expected to fade gracefully, leaving the stage to the next generation. Ann-Margret resisted this narrative. By releasing new material at 81, she challenged assumptions about age and artistry. She did not present herself as a relic of the past, but as an active participant in the cultural present. Her voice on the album carried traces of experience, richer and more textured than in her youth. Rather than masking age, she allowed it to add authenticity. The choice of songs also reflected her spirit, rooted in energy and freedom rather than melancholy. In interviews surrounding the release, she emphasized joy and creativity as her driving forces. For fans who had followed her since the 1960s, the album offered a bridge across time, while for new listeners, it was an introduction to an artist who refused to be bound by the passage of years. What made the moment more striking was the contrast with the rest of the entertainment industry. In 2023, conversations often centered on youth culture and fast-changing trends. Ann-Margret's decision to step forward with fresh work, rather than relying on her past catalog, marked her as singular. She was not content with lifetime achievement awards or retrospective honors. She wanted to create in the present tense. The album's success also reinforced her connection to a long-standing theme in her life: reinvention. From actress to singer, from stage star to caregiver, from Hollywood glamour to war zone performer, she had repeatedly reshaped her role without ever surrendering her identity. Born to Be Wild became another chapter in that ongoing narrative. But as much as this reinvention thrilled audiences, it also invited a deeper question. What happens when the energy of a lifetime finally confronts the limits of age? Let us tell you. Grief, faith, and the glow that won't dim. When Roger Smith passed away in 2017 after decades of illness, Ann-Margret faced a silence that no audience applause could fill. For more than 50 years, he had been her partner, protector, and anchor. His absence left a void that might have dimmed anyone's will to keep moving. Yet instead of retreating into seclusion, she chose to remain visible, active, and determined to honor both his memory and her own resilience. The years following his death revealed the dual strands of grief and faith shaping her outlook. She spoke candidly about the strength she found in her spiritual life, crediting faith as the constant that allowed her to face loss without being consumed by it. For Ann-Margret, belief was not a retreat, but a sustaining presence, a structure that gave meaning to the challenges she had endured, from public scrutiny to private heartbreak. Faith provided the endurance that fame alone could never supply. Her career did not slow with age or sorrow. In fact, one of her most celebrated recognitions had already arrived in 2010, when she won her first Primetime Emmy Award for a guest role on the television drama Law and Order: Special Victims Unit. It was a moment of validation decades in the making. Despite her long list of film roles and stage triumphs, major awards had often eluded her. This win underscored that her artistry was not bound to the 1960s or 70s, but continued to command respect well into the 21st century. For her, the honor was more than a trophy. It was evidence that her spark still reached audiences in new ways. Even as the entertainment industry constantly cycled through fresh faces, Ann-Margret carved out a late-career resurgence. By the 2000s, she was appearing again in the cultural spotlight, not as a figure of nostalgia, but as a woman who refused to be defined by time. She demonstrated this spirit most vividly in 2023, when she received the Women's Image Network Living Legend Award. The honor was designed to recognize pioneers who had not only shaped their industries, but also pushed boundaries for women across generations. At the ceremony, Ann-Margret's trademark humor shone through. Asked how she continued to stay so vibrant at her age, she quipped that it was all about speed, clarifying quickly that she meant the pace of life, not the drug. The line drew laughter, but it also revealed her philosophy. Momentum itself was her lifeline. As long as she kept moving, she remained engaged, relevant, and alive in every sense. What makes her late-life visibility remarkable is the balance she maintains between acknowledging heartbreak and embracing possibility. She does not deny the weight of grief, nor does she present her life as unscarred, yet she insists on momentum, on forward motion as an act of survival. Awards, roles, and public appearances are not simply professional achievements. They are declarations that her glow has not dimmed, even after the loss of the man who had shared her stage of life. This insistence on vitality has kept her present in the cultural conversation. In interviews, she projects warmth and energy, but beneath the surface lies a steady determination to continue. That determination may be her truest legacy. Not just the beauty, not just the fame, but the choice to persevere when the easy path would have been retreat. Which part of Ann-Margret's journey moved you the most? Was it her near-fatal fall on stage, the quiet struggles she carried in private, or the remarkable reinvention that proved her glow would never fade? Share your thoughts in the comments below.